Right now, we are following breaking news. The NCAA has announced penalties for Tennessee tied to hundreds of recruiting violations during Coach Jeremy Pruitt's time on Rocky Top. Now, we're waiting now for the NCAA to answer some questions. In the meantime, here are some highlights for you. Tennessee will pay at least $8 million in fines. We're still working to learn the exact dollar figure. More than 200 individual infractions were found. There will be no postseason ban for Tennessee, and Coach Pruitt will get a 6-year show cause ban. All of that will mean he likely will not be able to coach in college sports anymore. Meanwhile, UT also will lose a total of 28 scholarships. We are waiting for those questions to be answered via Zoom. Let's listen in now.
Commissioner at the Atlantic 10 and Chief Hearing Officer for this case, Kay Norton, President Emerita at Northern Colorado. President Norton will now discuss the findings and decisions of the panel. Following her opening comments, she will take questions.
Thank you, Matt, and welcome everyone. The Committee on Infractions decision details the findings and penalties in this case. My comments today are intended to briefly summarize our findings and address your questions. The decision, which contains the full details of the case, stands on its own merits. The violations in this case, which were egregious and expansive, occurred within the football program at Tennessee over the course of 3 football seasons. In total, the program committed 18 Level 1 violations, including more than 200 individual violations. The program mostly violated recruiting rules and provided impermissible inducements and benefits in the form of direct payments to prospects, enrolled student athletes, and their families. Additionally, 4 former football staff members committed Level 1 unethical conduct violations during the investigation in this case, following their separation from Tennessee. The sum of these violations makes this one of the largest cases this committee has ever adjudicated. The majority of the violations occurred as part of a recruiting scheme in which the football program consistently and impermissibly paid in cash to cover expenses for prospects during unofficial visits. The details and scope of that scheme are described in more detail in the news release and the decision. In at least one case, one of these paid-for unofficial visits was offered to a recruit who later committed to Tennessee to prevent him from taking a visit to a different school. Visits to college campuses are crucial for students as they determine where to go to school, so an inducement to prevent the prospect from exploring his options was also a disservice to that prospect. There are also several cases in which, after they enrolled at Tennessee, student athletes and their families continued to receive cash and other impermissible benefits from coaches. Combined with the inducements offered in the recruiting scheme, these impermissible benefits totaled nearly $60,000. As a result, a total of 16 student athletes competed in 151 games while ineligible, including 3 student athletes who competed in a bowl game while ineligible. The members of the football staff who engaged in these activities knowingly and intentionally violated long-standing NCAA rules, which were implemented by member schools to establish fairness in college sports. Because they intentionally broke fundamental NCAA rules, and in many cases worked to conceal those activities from school compliance staff, the parties in this case also violated ethical conduct rules. Furthermore, due to his personal involvement in several violations and his failure to monitor his staff, the former head coach violated head coach responsibility rules. The committee was particularly troubled by the culture in the football program. The compliance environment within this program for several years was demonstrably contrary to everything this voluntary association expects from member schools. Young staff members for whom their first experiences in college sports were within this program were exposed to intentional rule breaking and a culture toxic enough that they expressed hesitancy about coming forward about violations out of fear of retaliation. Finally, the panel determined that Tennessee failed to monitor its football program. Effective compliance is a shared responsibility. The conduct at issue in this case demonstrates that the football program, however, did not share the school's commitment to compliance, and in fact, the behaviors were intentionally non-compliant. While the school devoted significant resources to its education and monitoring efforts, it did not follow through and effectively detect violations when they occurred, despite the violations occurring with this frequency and magnitude and longevity. A compliance program can do everything right on paper, but a school and a program can fall short in actually living a culture of compliance. The panel does commend, however, the school's exemplary cooperation after the violations were first reported to the Office of the Chancellor. Tennessee demonstrated a set of behaviors that rise above and beyond a school's already high obligation to further the infractions process. To be clear, this panel does not believe that exemplary cooperation proves a culture of compliance, but it is a potential signal of a school's intent to do better moving forward. In April of this year, the Division I Board of Directors endorsed a set of principles that would reward schools that demonstrate this kind of exemplary cooperation by removing a postseason ban from the list of available penalties in an infractions case. NCAA rules around penalties have not effectively changed yet, and this panel found itself in a very difficult position as it was charged with applying existing penalties while also respecting the guidance from NCAA member schools. The association is at a crossroads philosophically, and the panel urges NCAA members to align active penalty requirements with, as of now, undefined guidance, so the application of penalties is fair for all schools in the infractions process. Today's decision preserves opportunities for current students who were not involved in wrongdoing to compete at the highest level and during the postseason. To be clear, however, the penalties the panel has prescribed in this case are significant. The financial penalty in particular is exponentially larger than the largest fine ever levied by the Committee on Infractions, and it is directly tied to anticipated postseason revenue sharing in this school's conference. The panel also prescribed substantial recruiting penalties and significant show cause orders that hold the individuals involved in wrongdoing personally accountable. Again, rather than listing them here, I will point you to the news release and the full decision, which I'm sure you've realized is over 80 pages long. This concludes my opening remarks.
Megan, can you explain to the reporters how they can ask a question?
Yes, if you would like to ask a question, please go ahead and use the raise hand function at the bottom of your screen. Again, that's using the raise hand function at the bottom of your screen, and then we will ask you to state your name and affiliation when you are unmuted. Our first question will go to Pat 40. Pat, please unmute your line and ask your question.
Thank you, Megan. Yes, Ms. Norton, my question for you, when we spoke to you in February in Las Vegas, you said, I'm trying to find the exact quote here, the postseason ban is a core penalty now, and indications we've heard are that it will remain a core penalty, although that maybe it's only applied in the most egregious cases, but it is one of the most effective penalties in terms of punishment. Do you believe if postseason bans are not going to be applied going forward, that there are other effective penalties in terms of punishment at the NCAA's disposal?
Yes, and of course, the postseason ban is only one penalty among an array that are available. The panel really considered very carefully in terms of its crafting the alternative financial penalty here in order to tailor an alternative penalty that fit the facts of what the violations, the benefit of the violations might have otherwise provided. So the punishment fits the crime is the concept that we took. And so we currently the postseason ban is still available to us. However, that is up to the membership to decide, because the Committee on Infractions doesn't write the rules. We simply interpret and enforce them.
Thank you.
Our next question will come from Brent Hubbs. Brent, please go ahead and unmute your line.
Yes. My question is in regards to the recruiting penalties. Obviously, by not doing the postseason ban, you were protecting the student athlete. But what was the rationale for the severity of the recruiting penalties for a coaching staff that no one who's currently employed at the university was a part of any of the previous wrongdoings?
Well, again, in an infractions case, we are always to a certain extent looking back at behavior that's already occurred. But particularly because these violations were directly related to recruiting and demonstrated a unwillingness to even pretend to follow the rules. The NCAA is concerned with protecting the student athlete, but not necessarily with restrictions that may affect the ability of recruiters going forward. So, by the way, the institution had self-imposed these recruiting penalties. They were discussed at length between enforcement and the institution. And we determined at the COI that they were appropriate.
As a reminder, we ask you to please state your affiliation before you ask your question. Our next question will come from Angela Gosnell. Please unmute your line and ask your question.
Oh, hey, Megan. Actually, this is Adam Sparks with the News Sentinel in Knoxville. Kay, I wanted to ask you sort of a hypothetical. Tennessee obviously cooperated quite a bit in this investigation. Had they not cooperated to the extent that they did, how would the penalties have been different?
Well, the issue of the effective exemplary cooperation simply wouldn't have been on the table at all. So in determining the level of the case, it would clearly have been standard, as we did find, or even aggravated. And that would have called the postseason ban in play as a core penalty. The discussions that are ongoing now about should there be any change in what the rules are that the membership is engaging in, spend a lot of time thinking about the effect of exemplary cooperation, but there's been no discussion about about changing any of the rules if it's not present.
Our next question is David from The Athletic. Please go ahead.
My question's been answered, Thank you.
Okay, I will do one more call for questions. If you have a question, please go ahead and use the raise hand function at the bottom of your screen. One more time to Adam Sparks.
Yeah, thanks. Casey Pruitt, Jeremy Pruitt's wife, did not receive any penalty that I noticed. She wasn't a former compliance employee. Why did she not get a penalty, and could she have gotten a penalty?
Well, she was not a compliance employee of the University of Tennessee. So that's an important distinction. This case was thoroughly investigated by enforcement and by a very cooperative university. And Ms. Pruitt was not named as a party in the case. based upon the findings of that investigation. So the case, when brought to us, did not involve her as an involved individual. We did appreciate the fact that the head coach's spouse chose to appear and participate in the hearings, and we did appreciate her cooperation.
Our next question will be Karthik. Please unmute your line and ask your question.
Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry if this sounds like a stupid question, but I just wanted to kind of get this on the record here. So the $8 million fine was given to Tennessee, but at the end of that statement, and the one that you all released out, that the panel also prescribed a legislative fine, $5,000 plus 3% of the football program budget. Is that on tack in furthermore onto the $8 million? Is it $8 million
Yes.
plus, or can you kind of explain more on what that means?
Yes, well, that is a standard penalty in the penalty matrix. And in addition, there is a third element of the penalty, which is going to be calculated and tacked on to the 8 million and the percentage of the budget penalty related to the school's participation in the 2020 TaxSlayer Gator Bowl. And there was revenue that came to the institution. And in that, 3 ineligible student athletes participated in that game. So the revenue from that was distributed to the school will also be tacked onto the penalty. We're awaiting the actual calculation of what that'll be.
Our next question will be Pat Forty. Pat, please unmute your line.
Yeah, I wanted to follow up on the Pruitt penalty, a 6-year show cause. There have been longer show cause penalties given in the past. I'm wondering what all went into factoring in 6 years, but then also the 100% suspension should he get a job there. I was wondering if you could discuss that penalty as well.
Yeah, we always look at previous cases that are somewhat similar, although no cases are identical. So the 6 years fell within the range of level 1 aggravated head coach responsibility penalties that we've imposed in the past. And I'm sorry, I've already forgotten the second half of your question, Pat.
Sorry, the second half, yes, was the 100% game suspension or season suspension. Should he get a job within that span?
Yes. Well, one of the principles that the association has adopted in April in going forward was included emphasizing individual responsibility and liability. So the COI has made some recommendations about how suspensions ought to be done in a consistent manner going forward. And one of those things was to specify things like 100% suspension, given the egregious nature of these particular violations, and also some of the things, the ambiguity that may have been created in the past about, well, we'll suspend the coach for every game day, but not for all of the days leading up to and after. So we wanted to be clear about what the effect of the show cause order will be.
And we have another question from Brent Hubbs from VolQuest. Please unmute your line and ask your question.
Yeah, just a little house cleaning on the donor who has been indefinitely disassociated. What is indefinitely? Is that lifetime? Can they apply for reinstatement at some point with the university? Can you give any clarification to what indefinitely exactly means?
You know, I'm not absolutely certain. I believe that indefinitely means there's probably some opportunity for reprieve at some point in the future, but I'm not sure. I might ask Mr. Pruitt.
So the Committee on Infractions has a policy that it acknowledges disassociation penalties for 10 years, and then thereafter it is incumbent upon the institution to reinstate a booster or someone who's been disassociated. So from a committee on infraction standpoint, that'll be a 10-year penalty, and thereafter it would fall with the institution.
As a follow-up to that, is that 10 years starting with the ruling today, or is that retro back to the moment that that person was disassociated?
Let's see, and Matt, I'll ask, I'm looking at you as well, but I believe this was self-imposed, was it not already? So the university has already acted, is that correct?
It was self-imposed beginning, I think, in 2021, but penalties begin running with the release of the infractions decision. So the committee accepted it today. It would run 10 years from today, and then thereafter it would fall with the institution. Thank you again for joining us. This concludes our comments. A recording of this press conference will soon be available at ncaa.org.